Welcome to Flipping the Table. Today, Michael crosses a new threshold through a conversation with members of Generation Z. Each guest was born between 1999 and 2005. Looking at the news on campuses across the nation, this generation appears as willing to get radically angry as any since the 1960s. Could that energy eventually be seen in the movement to create a healthy and resilient food system? Michael seeks to find out today in his conversation with Coco Sanabria, Sofia Rodriguez, and Mandara Ichel. Enjoy the show.
Today is a special edition of Flipping the Table, where we will have a chance to hear from three vibrant representatives of Gen Z, those born between the late 1990s and the mid-2000s. These are the first Gen Z guests to join me for a conversation. I'm quite excited about it. According to sources across the web, members of Gen Z are digital natives, competitive, fully comfortable with diversity and multiculturalism. They search for authenticity, they're entrepreneurial, and yet, in somewhat of a contradiction, they crave stability. And who can blame them, actually? For if you look at all the crises before us, I'm the same way. So today, my three guests will offer us a chance to see if the web accurately generalizes about Gen Z, or if our small but interesting sample bucks the trend. Our topic today, of course, is their perspectives on food and agriculture. Are the issues we talk about on Flipping the Table resonant for them, or their friends and fellow students? In short, what do they care about when it comes to food, farming, and the future? My guests are first Coco Sanabria. In a few weeks, she will graduate with a master's in sustainability science and practice at Stanford University, where she has explored the intersection of health and sustainability with a focus on upstream health. Her undergraduate studies in bioengineering fueled her interest in human health, health tech, and ethics, and the ways to scale change. She recently completed her master's practicum working with the USDA AMS-funded California Regional Regenerative Meat Project with Roots of Change and our colleagues from UC Davis and IC Foods. And she played a pivotal role in our March event with 100 ranchers, processors, chefs, butchers, and buyers. Sofia Rodriguez is a first-year student at the University of Washington, pursuing a degree in food systems and nutrition, and is on the path to become a physician. Hailing from Los Angeles and Berkeley, she has actively participated in diverse climate change and reproductive justice initiatives. Sofia's dedication to understanding the connection between climate, food, and public health fuels her academic interests. Mandara Ichel has been a lifelong learner when it comes to food systems, sustainability, and agricultural practices. At 12 years old, she was not only working for her father at his farmer's market booth selling organic, locally sourced, and freshly prepared meals, but was learning about sustainability and farming practices through her Waldorf school education and a mother deeply dedicated to healthy eating. Mandara is a recent graduate of Loyola Marymount University, where she earned a BA in theater arts with a minor in psychology. So, I hope you will be inspired by Gen Z as I have been over the last year. Let's begin. Coco, Sofia, Mandara, welcome to Flipping the Table. How are you?
We're doing well, Michael. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah. Well, looking forward to the conversation. As you guys are all Gen Zers, really important generation. Look what's going on the campuses right now. You guys are wild folks. Lots happening. So that's important. So let's just dive in. I'm going to start with the first question. And so I'm going to assume that each of you may have a different reason for your interest in food and farming. And so I'm just interested in you sharing with our listeners how or why you became aware of and interested in this topic of food and farming. And Sofia, why don't you begin?
Yeah, of course. So for me, cooking and baking has always been like a big part of my life. I grew up in a very like Hispanic family, so every Christmas we would go over to my aunt's house, make tamales, and just bake. And that was one of my passions. It still is. And also in high school, I began to get involved more in like the climate movement. So I had an opportunity to work with the city of Santa Monica, which is where I'm originally from, and work on a climate campaign with them regarding transportation. So I became really interested in that movement, and kind of food systems is a newer topic that like I found out about, and it was able to combine both my two passions for like the environment and climate justice and food. So that's kind of how I came about it, because it's like the perfect melody and intersection of how I can study those two topics and see how they interact with each other and the impact they have on each other. And then also going back to like the health aspect, and seeing like how that could possibly, how that impacts health and overall like, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, and I think I remember you want to be a physician potentially, right?
Yeah, I do. So just seeing that impact on health and that intersection. It's very
It's
interesting.
important.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. How about for you, Mandara?
Yeah, so for me, I mean, I'm not quite in the industry, but I the short answer is that I've just grew up around it. So I would say from, I was raised by a single mom, and she was someone who's very food conscious. I love to say, or anyone who asks kind of like, oh wow, like you cook a lot, you're like so healthy, like how did that happen? And I'm like, well, I was raised on rice, beans, and kale, which is pretty much how my diet looked, with a little bit of polenta blended in there. And then my dad, he is also from Yucatan and comes from a long line of butchers. He also has a big part in sustainable agriculture. When he had a restaurant, that was a big part of the link that he was able to have in order to have this really wonderful local meal. So there was that. And then I also, at a young age, was part of a Waldorf education system. And in about third grade, we learned how Native Americans, like different Native American tribes in California, and their various farm working practices. And so that also became part of a larger curriculum of studying crop, various crop methods, crop turning, and all of these different systems in which to support better and more healthy ways to go about how we farm. So that was just from the get-go, from a very young age, is how I was immersed. And now I'm just kind of a health food nut and cook a lot. So yeah.
Good. Coco.
Yeah. So I guess actually my transition into food and farming, or I guess like agriculture in general, came from an academic interest in health. So as initially what I was studying, I was interested in health technology, as kind of mentioned, and that didn't feel deep enough to me, or I guess it felt like too downstream of a lot of the problems that are seen around the world, and particularly in the US. So I kind of transitioned into this interest into sustainability and looking at how health and sustainability intersect and what we can do at that kind of like nexus branching point, which ultimately brought me into farming, agriculture, and food from an academic perspective, because I mean, a lot of what you are what you eat, as the saying goes, and just so much impacts what goes into the food that we're having. And you also, I just feel like, don't have as much control as I would like over what you're eating, which is everything that goes on from like the ground up. And so that was kind of my academic intersection into it. But finding food and finding like farming makes total sense to me. As Sophia and Mondara have mentioned, I grew up around food, like grew up loving food, making food. Like some of my earliest memories are my mom sitting me on the floor to like mix the bowl when I was not even old enough to stand, like kind of involving me in those processes. And so it just makes sense to kind of circle back and have that be able to be a part of my life now.
Cool. Thank you. All three of you. That was interesting. So I mean, when you think about, I mean, the thing I'm really interested in about all this is, how deep these motivations go, and are they, I mean, each of you has made decisions about your life, whether it's what you're going to eat or what you're going to study or what you're going to be active about, is all coming from those early experiences. Do you see many other people in your world that have similar experiences? It seems like young people know a lot more about food now than my generation did at your age. Mandara, what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that for me, it's been a bit variable, and I think this is a fantastic question to ask because I think there is a greater awareness for sure. However, it really, having been someone who's now lived in various parts of the West Coast, it varies. It varies greatly. I now have lived in LA for the last 2 years, and people that I've gone to school with, it's a breadth. It's really is like a variability. And I would have to say that in my friend group, there's probably 70% who don't know a lot about food, who aren't really aware of quality, who don't know a lot about farming. I actually have one dear friend who's uh, born and raised LA, and he asks me what organic is. He does not know what organic is. And that was shocking to me because, having grown up in NorCal, where a lot of my dear friends are, and that's the kind of the 30% of who I know that really are aware of quality of food and like we're just raised around it and have this conscientiousness. And then there's some transplants that I have here. My two housemates specifically are very, very food aware, but that actually came mostly from health issues. And also being in the space like LA where there are these really intense health pockets. So I'd say that there is a greater wave, and yet there's still a lot that we can that has to be addressed within our generation, and there's a lot of gaps in knowledge.
When you lived in Oregon, was it different?
Yeah, so I lived in Oregon for the first 2 years of my college experience, and it it was a little bit different. I do have to say that there still actually wasn't that much knowledge. It was less than I would have expected for somewhere like Oregon, where obviously there's a lot of agriculture that's being done over there. So yeah, I would have to say Northern California was the most conscious and aware place out of all the places I've lived, for
Okay,
sure.
good. Coco, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting question. I think as I've dove into like exploring the topic more, I've taken it upon myself of just like telling other people or just being excited about it and having the opportunity to have those types of conversations more often. I would definitely say it's a mix of people who are aware and aren't aware, and also the range of awareness is quite large. I think most notably, food conscious, a lot of it comes from like, well, if you care about like what you're eating, there's a often super easy comparison to make of like, oh, well, then you're vegetarian or vegan, and like this transition into that discourse, which I think is really limited into like what the broader topic can be, and also sometimes just gets a bad rap. Like it's kind of something that people can fight over without really discussing about like what are the benefits of different diets, or even just like regardless of your like the just thinking about like what foods you're eating, regardless of if they're solely vegetables or something like that. Um, I think interest is growing. I will say that something that often comes up for me, which I think is a really interesting conversation, is the I have friends that think food is like an experience or like a time with family or friends or cultural, like they have this like other tie. And then I have friends that think food is fuel, and like that is exclusively the thing that food serves. And so the relationship with food is just very different across the spectrum. They're typically like you're less likely to put an energy to like make it tasteful or enjoy the presence that food can have at your table or with people, and just kind of like get it down to get moving. I have a lot of difficulty with people that like think just food is fuel because I'm like, oh my gosh, you're missing out on so much. But I think that that's a lot. I guess it's kind of like a big divide in that respect. And I'm not really sure how to branch that because I think that if you're not caring about the very base thing of just the food that's going in your own mouth, of the taste of it, and that's kind of like the most intimate experience, like how are you like it's going to be much more tricky to figure out how you're going to care like downstream about where your food's coming from.
Interesting. Thank you. Yeah. So, Sophia, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, kind of building off what Coco was saying. I think what I've experienced is that the relationship that you have with food really stems from like early like childhood family experiences. For me, my both of my parents are in healthcare. So, and I also grew up going to a like hippie STEM school. So, like one of our field trips was going to the farmers market. So at an early age, I was exposed to like organic foods and like more like getting your food from like going from farm to like table rather than like going through like all the different processes. But definitely like I grew up in LA and growing up in that like specific area, I thought that like everyone was thinking the same, like everyone was conscious about health and like about like how food affected that. And then I honestly think that when I moved to Berkeley halfway through high school. That's when I started to, I mean, I realized not everyone has the same relationship with food, but there is when I started to see more differences in my friends and realizing that not everyone thinks the same as Coco was saying, like some people I definitely saw that like the way that they were raised was food. When you eat food, you either eat it in a family setting where you all like sit down and have a family dinner, or sometimes you eat it by yourself, you eat it watching TV, and that kind of really like ends up impacting the relationship with food that you have. So I think there's a large spectrum that I've been able to see.
So
Definitely.
yeah, you all kind of have a very similar view of it. I will say this, listening to you, when I was that age, um, the only way that I think that 30% of the people my age did not think about food. The way they thought about food was the meal. We ate as a family, or like you guys are saying, we didn't. But there was no thought about the system of food, or even hardly anything about farming, unless you grew up in an agricultural family, of course. So yeah, so even 30% is encouraging to me. And so Mandara threw out that percentage. Do you think that's an accurate percentage of the amount of people that are conscious of food, or is that too large a number or too small a number?
I mean, I would say, especially hearing what Coco and Sophia would have to say, I would say that that's a fairly reasonable number. And I mean, you have to think as well about, where we're at. We're in California right now, where that is generally just a very focused upon topic. And not only that, but like we are one of the most wealthy states. So that is also really going to affect what sort of knowledge we have access to. And beautifully what Coco said beautifully about this idea between food as fuel and food as culture, that also directly stems from like socioeconomic access. And so that's something that of course here in California we have different policies to kind of like mitigate that, and yet that is still something that is very much shaped by access. So that's what popped into my head as well.
You know, it's interesting. There used to be I don't know if it's still there, but Stanford was one of the first places that studied the adoption and diffusion of ideas. And one of the first studies that was done back in the 60s was a study of the adoption and diffusion of chemical use in agriculture. Stanford Research Institute, I think it was. And they said if 20% of the society accepts an idea, it's embedded permanently in that society, and it can lead to systems change within that society. So if you are all right, the 30% people know, that's a very good sign to me, and I take hope in that. So let's move into a second question that I have for y'all. And I guess you kind of touched on this, but I guess we've been talking about this in a way, but it has to do with your classmates and friends. And it's not really, it's more about, do they see the linkages between climate and food, or between cancers or obesity or animal welfare or pollution and food? I mean, let's say they're not even that interested in it, but do they understand that linkage? Mandara.
Yeah, I would say that I think the most I think common theme that I've seen is probably between um food quality um or climate/food quality when it comes to meat. I think it was Coco who had said something about people thinking, oh, vegetarian, vegan is the way to go because we just avoid meat because, it's bad. Right? No. Like that's not, it's like, I mean, you can. Sorry, not to crap on anyone who's going that route. Kudos to you. But the real issue is that we need to focus on better farming practices when it comes to raising meat. And there's a way in which the climate, yeah, sure, the climate is affecting that, absolutely. But it has to do with the way in which we're looking at, I guess, those things. So I guess what I'd say is that's probably what I've seen the most, is that people are saying going vegan, going vegetarian is a better way because it better supports climate change or whatnot. But I think that that's, it's missing a greater point. So that's what I've seen. I don't think I've seen a lot of conversations when it comes to the other ideas you expressed.
Like
Which,
fast food. People don't think about fast food and its health impacts.
yeah, exactly. There's a little bit, again, within the 30% that I know, absolutely. But outside of that, those aren't the first ideas to pop in.
What about social justice? What about farm workers? What about access to healthy food for low income people? Is that even on the table?
For the 30%, yes. Absolutely. We actually, my housemates and I have had many conversations about that, and how do we support, local farms? How, like, what are tangible ways? But again, it's hard. It's hard, especially when you're like, you have no knowledge base and you're diving in for the first time. You don't know where to start. It's just kind of this nebulous idea. So that, yeah.
Okay. Coco, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, actually, so I agree with a lot of what Madara said. I also think that there's a little bit I disagree with. Just like I think that there's a lot of opportunity of having some of those discussions about like farm workers' rights, or like low income access to food, or even like the fast food as negative health implications. But I don't think they're necessarily talked about within, or exploring them within the same system. Because Michael, what you're referring to is like a very systems-based orientation to everything that's happening in the food system, the people who are involved, like you as a consumer, the whole dynamics of like sale and everything. And I think a lot of the conversations that I've heard, at least, might mention some of these aspects, and might comment on like the rates of obesity due to fast food, particularly in areas that are like food deserts, for example, and how that access can balance out. But it won't transition into what does that mean for like access to transportation, for example, or like where is the food that like you food deserts exist in places that are like agricultural hubs as well. So like where is that food going? Like the conversation doesn't shift necessarily outside the scope of that direct thing. There is opportunity, of course, for those types of conversations. The school sustainability that just kind of reopened or opened at Stanford about 2 years ago is super focused on that systems-based thinking. So I have had a lot of opportunity to discuss those things with classmates and like open that up. And I will say it's not limited to a food-based system, like a lot of our conversations, but it does invite a lot of people, at least within this like campus circle, to have the opportunity to think about and talk about things in that bigger perspective. But I do think it's lacking. And I think even just like the opportunity to point out like where where those links in the systems kind of dissolve, or like where they need help, is definitely a really big next step that needs to be taken.
And so when you say that, I mean, you're in a program that's about sustainability and systems, so it is a what's the word? It's a unique group in one sense, right? It's a small group of people in the world. But when you get into those conversations, are you touching upon the impact of capitalism on the system?
Definitely. It comes in super heavily. There's like a whole, we had a whole discussion that kind of bled into so many others of just like, what would it look like to create an economy that is entirely different, that's based on kind of just like reusability. And I'm totally blanking on the term right now, but that idea of just, if you have an economy that's based on
Closed system, a circular
yeah, like
system.
a circular economy. Thank you. Of just being able to put those same materials that are usually just expended back into the system without drawing fresh materials out. There's a lot bigger opportunity, and I think that that conversation was something that really invigorated a lot of people. It was super interesting. It also, you know, there's an element of just like questioning of like, but how can we make this happen? And how can we make this happen? And kind of going about that in a different way. Again, not that one had a really beautiful component of being able to talk across disciplines. That's something that's really great about, I guess, the program that I'm in as well, is that everyone comes from very different backgrounds. We have our, you know, architecture and policy people, our health-based people, like our fashion people, like you're going to get the perspectives that you're looking for within that group, and to be able to have that conversation is incredibly fascinating. It's also difficult to like kind of see how everyone frames together, but it definitely has presented a really great opportunity to talk about it in class, and I think that it bleeds out from there as well, like being
Well,
able to
you brought up something interesting, which is about the complexity of systems. Systems are complex. Food system is really complex. It's hard for humans to deal with complexity, but at least your program is doing that. So, Sophia, what are your thoughts on this?
For me, and in the terms of like the communities and like my friends that I spend time with, I don't really see many of my friends taking time to like actually think about like food and like where it might come from and the different issues that surround it. I think that maybe one of the topics that might be more in people's heads is in terms of sustainability. Especially on my campus, they try to do a lot of work on sustainable packaging. So I think that students might be more aware of that because I don't know, they're bombarded with compostable this, compostable that. So I think in terms of like the way that people might be thinking about food, they could be thinking about it as like, how could they like be more sustainable? But I don't really see many connections with other aspects, like farm workers' rights and I don't know, like the complexities.
What about not even climate? You
Climate,
get those huge heat waves up there.
climate in terms of like how honestly, not really. Like I think right now, most of my friends are first years or ending first years, and they're just focused on trying to figure out like what they want to do.
Yeah.
So they're not really thinking about like different, or I just haven't been able to like have like those deeper talks with many of my friends, unless they're my friends that are taking nutrition with me or like biology. Then they tend to have more of like a impact climate change mindset, but otherwise not as much.
You have a food systems program up there?
Yeah, so there's a specific major and program in the school public health, and it's food systems, nutrition, and health. It's pretty new. I think it's been around for about 10 years. But it's a very small major, but it's growing definitely. But I don't
And
think
how many, when you say small, does that mean 10 students? I mean 100 students?
no,
50?
I would say, honestly, I've only met 5 students, but I know that the total program maybe has the graduating class of this year, they were around like 40, 50 students.
Okay, good. That's interesting. Great. Well, so part of what's underneath my question away and I talked about this in the intro. If you look at the news today, you see what's going on campuses across the country. around what the war in Israel. There's a lot of anger. Also, if you look at people's concerns about animal welfare, I live in Sonoma County. Young people have been demonstrating and there's a ballot initiative around confined animal feeding operations and the desire to close them. And it's so poorly written, in my view, that it's going to shut down most of agriculture that has to do with dairies or poultry in Sonoma County. But whether it's a good initiative or not, or a ballot initiative, it's important that there are a lot of young people who are willing to kind of put their bodies in the line. I mean, they've been going to farms and standing there. And you look what's happening in France, where farmers in the thousands come to Paris and bring their tractors and dump manure at a McDonald's, cow manure at a McDonald's restaurant, or shut down the roadways because they don't like the farming regulations being put in place. Do you ever believe in your bones that there could be a time that your generation would be motivated enough to actually get upset about the food system, or is it just pie in the sky, never going to happen? Why don't you go, Coco?
Yeah, I think you're going to have champions to the cause, as with many other causes. I think if the ideal is to get kind of that whole like boots on the ground, this is the forefront of like the problems that we're addressing. I think it's going to take a lot to get enough population interested in that aspect. However, I think that climate change as a whole is one of those conversations that people are increasingly worried about. It's like it's live and like it's in the center of everything. I know so many more people that are now interested in studying something that is either directly related or tangentially related to climate impact. And I think that conversation, it's so easy to backtrack into how the food system can be like the pivotal solution in addressing a lot of these climate issues. And so I think that there's an opportunity, and I think that you will, again, have like those people that will stand up for that necessarily. But I am hesitant to expect that there will be enough of a population to make that our singular focus or our primary focus.
Mm-hmm. So, Mandara, kind of building on what Coco said, and you're in a different field. You are a theater major and you're psychology minor, and I know we've talked about the things that you might want to be doing with your career and using the arts as a way to teach and motivate people and heal people. If you think about what you're interested in, what you're hearing today, how do you combine those things? Do you think there is there energy? Because it's never going to be the maximum population. I mean, come on, even what's happening on the campuses today, even in the 60s during the Vietnam War and the movement for racial justice, and there wasn't the majority population. It doesn't take the majority. It takes just enough people willing to stand up and say no more, or it's got to change. I mean, what are your thoughts, Mandara?
Yeah, man, there's a lot in my head right now. Because for me, it comes back to awareness. It really does. I think that the conversation we're having here is incredible. But it's not, as Coco aptly said, you're gonna have champions for the cause. They're gonna be champions because they have a certain knowledge base, right? They have a certain authority over the topic. But as you said, as the pedestrian view in its way, being someone who's outside of this field, I know of so many. I'm here because I was just coming back from teaching a school, and I teach from kinder through 5th grade. And the food that they have, the hot lunch that they had was disgusting. I was like watching my kids eat it, and I'm like, good God. Oh my God, that's what we're serving. Like, so it really is this thing of, we need to have more conversations about this. We need to make it aware, from the schools, from elementary schools all the way up to higher education. We're all here as higher education educated individuals. I know, Sophia, you're getting your start, which is incredible, and you're killing it. But so we are in a very great position to be having these conversations, but not everyone is. So in my view, being someone who again comes from theater, I think about, okay, so what are ways in which we can generate these conversations in a way that sparks people's interests, that does kind of make it more, I don't know, an equitable, more broadened view. And for me, I'm like, okay, let's fricking do some programming about it. Let's create ways. Actos is something that was used to discuss different, when Cesar Chavez, that whole movement, actos were a theatrical mode in which to employ the ideas of resistance and unionization, excuse me, to those who were illiterate or whose first language was not English and they didn't understand what was going on. And that was done throughout Southern California, and was an incredible way to get that knowledge out, and did bring people together to then have this movement of unionization for farm workers come to be. So I think that's a fantastic historical example, and in my mind is something that, especially walking away from this conversation, is making my wheels turn. And I'm like, okay, so now I was just hired as a education fellow at Berkeley Repertory Theater. And so I'll be working there this coming August. And I have control of the education of what is being taught. And in my mind, I'm like, all right, yeah, let's talk about food. I'll see what I can do about that. So
Hey, that's exciting.
I'll leave it at that.
Sophia, what are your thoughts?
I definitely agree on what Mandora was saying about awareness, that it really does start on like what people know about certain issues. I definitely think that it's not the fact that people don't think that like food systems and like the impact it has and the correlation it has with so many different issues like climate change. I don't think that people don't think that it's important. I think that people are just, they're not aware. They don't know, they don't realize that in fact it does have an impact. I think we need to start having these more important conversations, just like both Coco and Mandara were saying, and start talking about like how regenerative ranching or regenerative farming, how those are moves that we can make that will help us in the future. So like there definitely are going to be people that are more passionate about it, and I think that like they're going to help start the movement, or but I don't think that unless we start educating more people, it can't be. I don't think enough people are going to come and realize that this is an issue on their own. I think it's just we need to start spreading more awareness about it.
Mm-hmm.
I
So
think
go ahead,
can I
Coco,
jump in
please.
with the last? Yeah. I just kind of circling back to even just the beginning of our conversation, I felt like a lot of us brought up just our own experiences as small children with food and how that interaction was. Like the cafeteria lunches have always been pretty terrible. There was one family at my school that was a chef, and they brought in an opportunity to basically do an open salad bar. And I remember the day that we cut the ribbon for that salad bar. I was like third or fourth grade. It's there. Did all the kids want to eat the salad? No, not necessarily. Can you compete with mozzarella sticks? Like, not all the time. But that interaction and being able to, because it wasn't just like it showed up one day, it was a whole effort. We visited the farm where like food was coming from. We went to Tanaka Farms down in Southern California. We also went to a community garden and like participated in cultivating some of the food that was going to be in the initial salad bar. I think the opportunity, just based on our conversation, might be our generation's impact and like our ability to impact the younger generation, recognizing that like the key thing was that we had such an integral experience with food at a young age, and being able to pass that on and make it stronger. As Mandara said, if it's through theater, if it's through like different things of just having that conversation and creating that relationship for others. And I wonder if that's going to be the opportunity that really emerges for us.
Well, this reminds me of the kind of mission of Alice Waters with her work around school districts and trying to change the school food system so that it's more like France, where people are fed a very nice meal at lunch every day. They sit together, they have an hour to eat, it's prepared there, and it's a totally different experience that shapes the consciousness in the way that you're describing those childhood experiences for you. So her mission to change the school food situation is a fundamental shift that needs to be made. I'm hearing that from all three of you. And I agree. I also believe, and I'm curious what you think, if you look at the science, we're headed for some very difficult times related to the climate. That's going to be a teachable moment. People are going to be looking for solutions. And we already know that capturing carbon in the soil is one of the solutions. And that's one of the reasons we're working with regenerative ranchers who have an opportunity to do that. And other farmers can do the same thing by building soil. So, I do think there's going to be avenues there's going to be teachable moments because of what's happening. The fact that where you are up in Washington State, where the temperatures are going to 114 degrees, that never used to be or Oregon, Canada, where the fires have already started. I don't know if you're watching the news. They have wildfires all over Western British Columbia already. It's like crazy. So those things are going to be the things. And then those will be the opportunities for people to start going back to what you're saying about systems thinking. Why is that happening? What is the linkages? How does that work? What can we do? It's interesting. So I think, we're approaching the last 10 minutes here. I'd be really curious for a couple things. What do you want to see happen? And maybe it's derived from the things that we've talked about, but it would be interesting to hear what you'd like to see happen with the food system in your lifetimes. You're all in your 20s. You're going to be here for 60 to 90 years. If they're right about projections, you're going to live a long time. So, what are you thinking about how you'd like to see it play out? Sophia, why don't you start?
Definitely for me, I hope that there's going to be more awareness starting at younger age. So just as we've been talking about, just like starting to educate younger generations first and helping build those positive relationships with food and starting to think of food as more than just something that goes into your body, but more about like where it comes from and the impact that it has. Definitely is I hope to see in the future, and hopefully people will start, like people from all fields will start to recognize not only like climate change, the fact that it's an issue, it's definitely on people's minds, but I don't think people know how they can help or like different ways. I think it's easy to for people to be like one person can't make a difference. Mm-hmm. And definitely starting to move in that mindset that even doing small things can have an impact. So moving towards that instead of thinking that as individuals we can't do anything, but moving in more of like a positive, how can we help? How can we come together?
You are thinking about medicine and you're preparing yourself to go to medical school. One of the things that I think about and I wonder if you're interested is doctors get very little education. MD programs get very little education around nutrition. But now we know food as medicine is an emerging field, emerging trend where doctors are writing, and we've worked on these projects where doctors write prescriptions or practitioners write prescriptions in in the clinics in communities, particularly low-income communities, and then people get matching money to fulfill those prescriptions for fruits and vegetables. Is that something that I could challenge you to bring up as you pursue your medical training?
Definitely. I mean, we've seen that food has such a large impact on health and definitely is a large area that needs more awareness, more education on. And I also think that there's big discrepancies and gaps in the way that people view food, especially in regards to socioeconomic status. I mean, as Mandara was saying that she was at the elementary school where the hot food just did not look appetizing. I was fortunate enough to attend a private school where we had fresh options. We had a salad bar. So making sure that there's more of an equitable like distribution and that there's not this big gap starting at such a young age, because that definitely has a greater impact on the long term.
Huge impact. Yep. Mandara, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, I would have to say I'd have to reflect a lot of the same things that Sophia was saying. And kind of actually going off of what Coco said before about, yeah, starting young and really using the power of education to further these ideas from the very beginning. I had a similar experience to her when it came to being part of a Waldorf school, a very, very distinct and vivid image in my mind is going to having a field trip to Full Belly Farms, which was a third grade excursion where we would all go, and us little third graders would clomp around the field, and we ended up pulling like I think it was like 500 pounds of leeks or something. And like, there's like a picture of us like holding them on top of this truck. And then we also, during that field trip, it was an overnight and we learned to like milk cows and make butter. And also, I think collected or harvested and cooked fava beans. And it was just this really beautiful way in which like this whole, like us as a class got immersed completely into this farming culture and being able to really get excited to take part in the nitty-gritty of it was I think for me just so beautiful and exciting because children, I mean, and I work with children all the time, they have this hunger. They have this hunger for knowledge and excitement. And when you immerse them in that way, it gets their wheels turning like that. And I think that that's invaluable. But again, those kind of experiences rely on access. And so that's huge. And I do think that, as Sophia also said, this idea that we really have to focus on funding for schools, that in itself will help a great deal when it comes to what we're teaching and how we're teaching it. And being able to bring these resources to educate on topics such as food. If those are the things that we work on within our generation, I think that that's going to go so far for us and the food movement.
Thank you. Coco, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, long-term, big goal, small goal. Something that I wish we had more control over the nutrition that comes in our like natural produce. The percent, like the nutrients that you're getting out of a strawberry or whatever natural thing that you're eating are just so much less than they were even 10, 20 years ago. And that breaks my heart. I'm like, wow, we are missing out on such great potential of kind of these organic aspects. And I understand like biologically why some of those decisions were made, but I really think that a part of that was a lack of priority towards the nutrients and priority going instead towards yields or like appearance. And we need to get back away from that.
Shippability. Yeah.
Yeah. we need to get back away from that, because ultimately, like, if I'm eating, like, 5 cherry tomatoes and that used to be one, like, all of a sudden you're selling me a pound of tomatoes, and it's not worth the same as what it once was. And so I think that would be a really great goal, I guess, almost from a bioengineering perspective, to be able to revert back to some of those more natural practices, I'll call them.
Nutrient dense food, yeah.
More
Yes.
concretely into something that I think that everyone can do and should do, is learn how to ask questions, get comfortable asking questions, and kind of being critical of what it's about, like what the world is about. And that can be like, question what you're eating, question where it's coming from, like question how to make your recipe better, like why is it that, like, no, I'm using whatever butter instead of margarine. Like, maybe you don't need to ask those types of questions, but just having that opportunity of embracing curiosity in different areas of life, I think will bring a lot more to the table and open just a lot more discussions in public and like between friends and families. And I think that that's something that everyone can do like today. And I think that will also like lead us to take some really key steps moving forward overall.
Good. Well, I really want to thank all three of you for a couple of things. One, for your very cogent and articulate sharing tonight. It's been quite stimulating for me, and I think it will be for our audience. And I want to thank you for the fact that you're even interested in food systems, that you have a care about food systems because of your early experience. And I take hope and joy in the fact that you're going to be out there in the world, talking to people, experiencing things, influencing people. And it's a really good thing. And thank you for your time. Enjoy your summers. I'm sure you're all going to do some great things this summer and then in your future careers. And I want to stay in close touch with every one of you to figure out what's going on and where you end up. So thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening. Roots of Change is a program of the Public Health Institute.